Hey there, this just came up in a previous session, and I'm probably going to call this one the way in which improvisational comedy changed my life forever. Back on my journey and my communication journey, there was a point in time where I was completely uncomfortable to push record on a camera or be in front of an audience or even just raise my hand and speak up in a meeting. And at some point, I ran into this trainer, this speaker, and I said, "What do I do?" And she said, "Toastmasters, public speaking groups, and improvisational comedy classes." And so I did the first one, but this conversation is about the second one, improvisational comedy classes. I was in New York City. There were theaters. There were groups that would actually do improvisational comedy. And so for some of you who may hear improvisational comedy, a lot of times I say that and it's, "Oh, you did stand-up comedy." It's not stand-up comedy. It's something different. If you've ever seen the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's an old British show, but then it was in America. And it's there are people on stage and they get a suggestion. And the people on stage have no plan, no prior scripting, no specific characters that they've already mapped out. They get a suggestion for a topic, and then they jump into some kind of scene. They jump into some kind of character. Each one takes a character, figures out what character they are, and then they are really the delivery of it, the skill set of it is once you choose who you are as a character, let's just say you're going to be a gym bro who like has that kind of personality. You might take on a certain voice, you might take on certain language that you use and different words that are, aligned with gym bro. You have to stick and lock into that character and be consistent with it in the scene as it's evolving. And so there's an art to this, there's a skill to this, but early on I was terrified because you had to go up in front of a room of, in essence, strangers in your class, and the instructor would say, "Okay, here's the topic. The topic is, let's say, you're in a library." That might be it. And so you're in a library, and then all of a sudden you have to say, more or less decide what character you're going to be and what you're going to talk about. And then you also have to be in alignment and reflexive to the other character, who at the same time is trying to figure out who they are and what their character and what their characteristics are in the scene. And it's all on the fly. It's all improvised. And so initially, this was one of the most terrifying things in the world for me to be a part of. It was like, I didn't even want to go up and do the exercise. And fairly, most people in that room didn't want to either. We were all kind of stepping in a way that was highly uncomfortable for us. What started to happen was, time after time after time, getting over the discomfort, it was, wow, I can do this. I didn't do it so well, but I can do it. And then it was, oh, well, what would I have done a little bit better, next time? What's the improvement I can make here? And then all of a sudden, like I've talked about in past conversations, is when you're learning to ride a bike, first you're learning how to balance on the bike. You're learning how to pick up enough speed so you can keep the balance and you can stay on the bike. And then you got to figure out, well, how do I stop? And how do I slow down? And how do I make a turn? And how do I do all these things? But those initially are the basic functions. But as you get better and better and better, and you learn balance, and you learn speed, and you learn braking, you learn turning, now all of a sudden, that stuff is automatic. And now maybe you're doing some jumps. Now maybe you're hopping a curb. Now maybe you're doing different tricks and different things. And so you become functional at the basics. Similarly, with improvisational comedy, I started to become functional at the basics. Oh, topic, pick a character, be consistent with the character. There was also this rule in improv. It was called yes and that was the ultimate rule of improv, is whatever is thrown your way, you accept it as the thing, and then you add to it. So it's yes and. Scenes break down in improv when somebody says, "Hey, why is your finger blue?" And you say, "It's not blue, it's red." Like it almost just destroys the chemistry that's going on. It destroys the alignment because, and then you still have to be flexible in that moment, right? So the idea of yes and is whatever's thrown your way, you receive it and you add to it. But that is critical also in on-the-fly communication. When somebody asks you a question, it's not like you get thrown off. It's like, oh, I receive the question, I think about the question, and then I present a logical answer. Or you're in a presentation, something goes wrong, do you freeze and you stop and you don't know what to do? Or you're like, oh, okay, this thing just happened, this is what I might do, and then you move forward. And that comes with a lot of practice, a lot of iterations, but in the moment of it, you might not be prepared for it. So you got to be able to access the creative side of your mind that doesn't get frazzled, that has been there and done that, and can come up with solutions in the moment or address them in a way that's aligned with everything else that's going on. So to fast forward that, now when David used to be like deer in headlights in a stressful situation, and that would be exactly what I was thrown into during improvisational comedy classes. And even in the fake world of improv, I started to learn how to not be frozen, to figure out how to do some stuff, and then how to figure out how to do it a little bit better. And so now when I was thrown into these moments, I was a lot more flexible. I was a lot more creative. I had more, call it faculty, to adjust on the fly and be aligned with whatever was going on. But that translated into my life. That translated into meetings, sales presentations, conversations with other people, where in the past I might get constrained, I might get locked up. It was, no, we're okay here. What's going on? How do we adjust? What do I say here? So there's a flexibility in communication that's really important. I first learned how to do structural stuff with Toastmasters. The second stage was improvisational comedy and being able to do things on the fly, communicate on the fly, figure out how to deal with a situation when it was presented to you and you weren't prepared for it. And so for those watching who are thinking about their communication journey, how do you work on that? Well, you could find an improvisational comedy class or theater or place that's doing these kinds of things. They may not be accessible to you. So the way you do it is you just throw yourself into situations where you know you don't have a plan, you don't have a script, but you're going to figure it out. It might simply be, I'm going to choose a topic, I'm going to hit record, and then I'm going to talk for 3 minutes, and I'm going to see what comes out. And then I'm going to try to make it make sense. And I'm going to try to put some of the structures in. I'm going to try to do some of the things that I know how to do. And I might give myself a topic that I don't know much about and try to figure that out on the fly. And so there are ways you can actually build in some exercises for yourself to become more flexible in the moment. Actually, in Toastmasters, we would have these exercises called table topics where you didn't know what the topic was. Somebody gave you a topic, and then you had to talk about that topic for 2 to 3 minutes and talk about it intelligently and talk about it cohesively. Now, the first time I did that exercise, it was awkward. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to put a sound argument together. Now, if you gave me a topic like, I'm looking at this camera right now, tell me about this camera and tell me about the effectiveness of good cameras. Well, in this particular case, this camera actually, it's crazy. It moves around with me. And so there's a value to that. I think there's also a value to having a great setup. There's a great value in knowing how your camera performs. And this particular camera allows a lot of flexibility because it's mapping to you. So if I were talking about the camera there, I just talked about the camera on the fly, wasn't planning on it. But that's an example where something comes up, tell us a little bit about this thing. You can practice that as well. And actually, you probably do it. In essence, we do this all the time in our lives, in communication with others. I didn't know we were going to talk about that. And then you're in a conversation about it. The challenge is when you're in the spotlight, when you're in the moment, when it's an intense client conversation, or you're asked to public speak, or it's something that the limelight's going to be on you. Do you freeze? Or are you flexible? Are you at ease? Are you performing? And a lot of that comes with experience. So I hope this was helpful. But the point of this was how improvisational comedy for me was a game changer, because I used to be this stiff, rigid communication communicator as I was initially on my journey. And then as I learned how to do improvisational comedy and improvisational just communication, I found myself being so much more flexible and at ease in the moment. And things still come up now where it's like, what am I going to do here? But that's another thing, is how do you deal with the nerves? How do you deal with those things that come up? And we'll talk more about that in future sessions. But to bring this to the theme of unleashed and being unleashed, we want to be at ease in the moment. We want to know that we can handle those things that might get thrown at us. And the more that we throw ourselves into those scenarios, the future ones that come our way, we're going to say, oh, I've been in scenarios where I didn't know what was going to happen and I figured it out. I figured it out. Now you have an identity that says, I can figure this out. Even if I don't know what's coming my way, or even if I don't know how this is going to work out, I figured it out in the past. I'll figure it out now. I know how to improvise. So something to leave you with. Try this stuff out. Maybe even put yourself in a scenario that you weren't expecting and see how you do. Sink or swim. But eventually we learn how to swim. We learn how to stay afloat. We learn technique. And then it's automatic and we can do it on the fly anytime we want. With that, have a great day. Talk soon.